I just got a couple comments to make first, and then we'll open up for questions. You guys can fire away as long as you want. I think that, at the end of last season when we got together last, we talked about some things that would be important coming into this year. And not a whole lot has changed, I don't think, in our perspective. I think first and foremost, we're going to have to take a real building mentality to what it is that we try to establish for ourselves as a base this season. And we're going to have to start from zero. And that's how we've done it every year, and that's served us well. We have to, as I said before, we have to think big, but we got to build small, and maintain a consistency with how we have approached things in the past. I also think that's what's important is, we continue to embrace, our identity, continue to be consistent with who we are, not try to get outside ourselves and be something, that isn't repeatable for us, that isn't consistent with us. And that's going to be an important thing for us going into the season. And I think in seasons beyond that is to embrace who we are and what we're about. In terms of just continual improvement for our team, as we've talked about, we have to continue to study ourselves and find areas, marginal areas where we can get improvements. I think some of those would be communication, concentration, and then establishing a standard of performance that we can call on and measure ourselves by, regardless of who we're playing, where we're playing, or when we're playing. And that standard of performance has to tie us together and keep us consistent. And as I said before, part of continuing to improve is understanding your own performance. Bless you. Understanding your own performance and, being good self-evaluators. I think that's another thing that you find in high-performing teams. And we have to, continue to do that, and having that standard will be important. Other thing that, as I sit back and I think about it myself is, we can't take anything, welcome. We can't take anything for granted. We're not entitled to anything. We've never taken that approach. I think we'd be doing a disservice to ourselves, and as I said before, probably being inconsistent if we were to take any kind of approach other than coming in and just doing our jobs, understanding what works for us, and putting in an honest day's work and going home. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you guys have. And on any topics.
First of all, just coming into the start of the new year, how do you, manage those expectations that the team is obviously going to have?
Well, probably the same way we've done it in the past. We've dealt with all kinds of expectations, low ones, high ones. We've never really been driven by those. We have a set of things internally that we measure ourselves by, and we'll continue to do that.
Sam, you said when the new CBA was met, there were a lot of nuances you had to figure out. How much more comfortable do you feel at this time with those nuances?
Well, I think obviously with more time that's gone by, you're starting to get a better understanding of the agreement, the impact of the agreement, behavior within the agreement. But with anything else, it's always evolving. And I wouldn't say that you're ever, totally comfortable with anything. I think if you ever get too comfortable, you probably stop learning and stop progressing. But we're definitely getting to the point where we see the landscape. And, it's there's realities in there, like we've talked about. We've been very transparent about that. We have to manage, and we're comfortable with that, and we'll do the best we can.
Sam, your players had a busy summer with Summer League, the Olympics, traveling, all that kind of stuff. How do you feel like they've either improved or how they've developed through some of those experiences?
Well, we've had a pretty busy summer across the board. obviously, it's easy to point to the basketball component of it, and we've been fortunate, to have guys play in the Olympics, and not just the games themselves, but the preparation component, I think, is really good. But I also think, when I think about the summer that we've had, we've also had some really good experiences just holistically. I mean, the cultural and personal experiences from that Olympic experience for everybody involved is invaluable. The trip that several of our guys took to South Africa with Basketball Without Borders was a fantastic opportunity. I've never been, but I've heard it's a transformative experience. So I think across the board we've had guys that have, we of course expect them to improve from a developmental standpoint, and we work with them on those things, and from a basketball standpoint. But I also think that we've had some really good just overall growth with different things as well.
We know you've had a pretty busy summer too. Did you get a chance to decompress, and what do you do to decompress?
Yes, for me personally, I like, which many people in here probably don't really care about, but I'll say it anyway because I am interested in it. I like watching, I like music documentaries. Big fan of that. For those of you that haven't seen the new George Harrison documentary, it's fascinating. It's a long watch, but it's well worth it. And the other thing that I've kind of hooked on now is VH1 has this series called Classic Albums. Has anyone ever seen this? It's like, I'm totally hooked. And if you know where to find the actual set of them, let me know. I can't find them, so I do most of my viewing on YouTube. But they've got all these. It basically takes you back through how the albums were made. So Pink Floyd, The Wall. Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt was really good. Steely Dan, Asia, and you go back the producer and you hear what they were thinking, and the artists themselves, what they were thinking when they were doing the actual recording. It's just fascinating. I think it's really, really good. Really good.
Second job, I guess you want to be a producer or something.
No, I don't know. I've got hooked on it. I just think the creative process is really fascinating, and to see people working through that, and a lot of times how spontaneous some of the things are, that are become these historical songs or artistic, creations that are somebody sitting in the studio and just decides at the last minute, well, what if we put this on there? And it becomes just that piece that ties it all together. I think it's fascinating. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jay. Yeah, well, I don't think it's necessarily for me. It's not really the music part. It's more just something I'm interested in, and someone like George Harrison, just his, what inspired him, and his mentality, being part of that group, and things he accomplished. I don't know. I just find those things really interesting.
Does that tie anything how you put a team together? I mean, you mentioned putting this with that, and just how you build a team, that maybe creative side of putting pieces together to build a winning roster.
Well, to make that connection probably is to try to take the job too seriously. Maybe, but I just find enjoyment in it.
So is your goal to stay on the charts as on the dark side of the moon?
It's really interesting, just to see how they collaborated, and the things that were happening socially at the time. They kind of go into that, what was happening, how that influenced the artistic, bent on things. It's really interesting. I found it interesting. Other thing that I thought was interesting, or for me personally, I share it with everybody since we're on this weird kick. And everybody knows I'm really open about all this stuff. You catch me on a good day. My grandmother gave me this this summer. It's Nick. You're gonna have a lot of material. This little tiny pamphlet-like book that was from my grandfather from World War II. And it's like it probably was a little thicker, but over time it's just become smashed down and really thin. And in it, he rebuilt bridges in World War II is what he did. So in there is kind of a little bit of a journal of what he was doing. He never, ever, ever talked about his experiences, but it's just absolutely fascinating. And it's in pencil. But then as you get towards the back of the little pamphlet there, is all these names. He must have been meeting people. So there's people from Massachusetts, people from Nebraska, people just coming off the top of my head, people from Ohio, Florida. Probably the greatest thing that's anyone's ever given me, quite honestly. And it's like I'm scared to flip through it too many times because it might fall apart. So it's on its way to the safety deposit box. I hopefully can give that to my kids one day. But it's another summertime memory, I guess.
Sam, I almost hate to take us back to basketball issues, but what can you tell us about where things stand right now with the negotiations with James Harden and also with Eric Maynard?
Well, that was what I was saying about Dark Side of the Moon. It's a really great album. We've talked about the situations with both of those guys, and we've never made a habit of going into detail, about specific conversations, and we think highly of both of them as players, and we're hopeful that we can keep them a part of our organization. At the same time, we understand that there's going to be some challenges that we face. I hate to be redundant, but it's a reality. It's not an excuse. It's a reality, and we've embraced it. We accept it, I can't tell you how that's going to work out. I wish I could.
Have you yet sat down face to face with James Harden, or have these negotiations pretty much been going on between you and his agent?
Well, it would be uncommon to have conversations directly with the player. That's not something that we've done. Obviously, we have a great relationship with James on a lot of levels, but that's not a conversation that we'll have with the player directly.
Any concern that with the camp starting next week, not just locally, but a lot of national press can be talking about it, that kind of hangs over camp, and of course, depending on what happens by the 31st, the season?
Well, I think, it's a fair question, Myron. I think, well, first of all, once the season starts, the team has to focus on basketball. We have to focus, like I said before, on building the habits that are necessary, going back to that building mentality, not taking anything for granted, because we're not entitled. We got to do our work every day and build that base that we can establish. I'll continue to look at that situation, but once the season starts, I've got a lot of confidence in our group of guys. They're professionals, and they're here to do a job.
One of the things that might help you afford, James, is revenue sharing or cost you, and also the advertising on uniforms. Do you know what those numbers look like for you guys or for your team? That's a question that I'm really not educated enough to answer in terms of the patch. You're talking about the patch, right? I don't know the answer to that. I know we've got a great business staff that do everything they can to maximize our opportunities and give us the opportunity to continue to put a competitive team on the floor. And they're tremendous to work with. The business staff we have here is great to work with. We've got a great synergy, and they've got a great sense of the identity of our basketball team and what it is that we have a vision for, which is not only building a team, but also a franchise that can endure, and they're a critical part of that. As far as Harden and Maynard negotiations, is that a simultaneous thing, or is
Maynard dependent on what happens with Harden?
I think we talked about this one other time when we had the conversation regarding Serge probably. Every negotiation is different. They all have their own rhythm, they all have their own tempo, and they all have their own dynamics. So I wouldn't close the door on anything in regards to one or the other, but I also think that it's important that we're upfront about the realities of the situation, and but that doesn't change that we value those guys as players.
It's been a few months since the draft. What have you seen from Perry in the last few months? Just what he's been doing and how he's fitting in?
Well, he's had a good summer. He's worked incredibly hard within the walls of this building. We've seen that, but that's comes with the package. I mean, he's had a very high-level work ethic and has a great base to work off of. But what, all of the young players that we've had in the program, there's a process that they have to go through, and a lot of it's dealing with, pushing through limits that they have not had before. Understanding their own development, really embracing that, and dealing with the fact that in order to improve, you're going to have to go through some things that you're not necessarily, gifted or good at, and that's how you improve something or strengthen something. So he's dove head first into that, and he's been fantastic with that stuff. Now, is that going to translate into, how big is his role? How many minutes does he play? That'll all be determined in camp, and obviously ultimately be Scotty's decision. But in terms of controlling what he can control, he's doing a very good job with that.
The run to the finals, how does that, in fact, you made the finals, almost won the championship. Talk about how that benefits you this year. What's your players gained from that run?
I think when I think back to our progression as a team, it's accumulation of experiences, and so many of those have been experienced as a group together. I think that's a positive, and that experience is just another one of them. Obviously, playing that deep into the season was a test of varied levels, mentally, concentration, like we talked about earlier, physically, tactically, attention to detail. All those things have helped us. It just gives us more time and more experiences. I think now the next challenge, it's funny how that kind of bookends. The next challenge is to retain that, but not necessarily rely on it. We're going to have to go back to square one, as I said earlier. Retain those things, but also understand that we have to capture the level or the standard of performance that we established during parts of that postseason, and evaluate ourselves against that, because we've shown what we're capable of. I said at the end of the season, there were parts of this, I thought we played some of our best basketball in the Spurs series, and we have to capture that standard, and I think we're capable of that. But it's a long road.
Sam, back to James, the question of James and his resigning for just a second. Obviously, the big issue out there that people talk about is the luxury tax and going over. Is there a possibility that you guys might just bite that bullet for a year or two and just go ahead and try to sign into a big deal?
As I said before, there are certain realities that we face, and there's some inherent challenges that we face. I don't feel comfortable, quite honestly, talking about limitations and things that we ultimately will have to decide on. But I think we're making a commitment, to try to continue to put a competitive team on the floor. But we also have to do the right thing for the organization in the short and the long term. We think highly of James, and at the end of the day, we want to try to make it work for everybody, not just the team. but for everybody. And that's the way the best deals are done, is a collaborative approach. And, I think, it's just a situation that has to be navigated. I wish I could tell you I knew how it was going to end up. But, James is a very good player. We think highly of him. So I would probably just leave it at that.
You mentioned you never really talk to players, and I think most people understand why, but if it gets to be an impasse, do you ever think you might break that rule and say, have a conversation, you and him one-on-one, or?
I think for us, every situation is different, but it's not a conversation I'll be having with him directly. I mean, look, this is decisions have to be made. It's not just one side or the other. It's my job is to try to figure out a way to make it work for everybody, and it's not an easy job. I'd love to be able to find a way to make to meet everybody's expectations, but that's not necessarily the way that we can run our program. And I think James would very much like to be here, but hey, he's a talented guy, and I'm sure he's got to think through that on his end and do the best thing for him and his family. Look, by no means is anyone in our organization going to judge him by his decision. He's going to do what's best for him, and we have to do what's best for us. But at the end of the day, you hope that there's a collaborative mutual interest, and sometimes that can happen. Sometimes it can't. But it's no one's fault.
It's kind of rare that a team that makes the finals and is expected to challenge again gets rid of three of its oldest players. Now you're even a younger team overall. Your thoughts into not re-signing your three free agents and where you think your roster stands now?
Sure. Well, obviously we have a lot of appreciation for the guys that are here. And, for various reasons, from a team building standpoint or financial standpoint or what it might be, you got to make decisions. It's a good situation to feel like, you wish you had more spots for everyone, but it's just not reality. I think with that also comes opportunity. As you said, we're losing some corporate knowledge and some older guys. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And I have a lot of confidence in Russ and Kevin and their abilities as leaders. I think they'll continue to grow and continue to evolve, and I think they're ready for that.
You have another off-season around the NBA where a lot of teams are building from the outside in, bringing in free agents, while you continue to still do it from the ground up, so to speak. As a GM, just what do you think is the tougher job, trying to bring in those high-priced free agents or keep the younger ones on the team?
I'm not trying to avoid the question, but it'd be impossible for me to be judgmental on how anyone else does anything. I have a hard enough time just trying to do my job, quite honestly. So I have no business being critical or evaluating, what's harder or what's not harder. I think it's what makes the NBA great. There's 30 teams. Everybody's trying to do it a different way, has different circumstances, different dynamics, but we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to win basketball games on a regular basis. For us and our organization, we're always focused on, the sustainability of the franchise and also the endurance of the organization and the identity of the organization. Those things are going to be really important to us in Oklahoma City, and we'll continue to focus on those things. But we're not going to focus on those things and have an eye towards, what if or what could be. That's never been our approach. We've always focused on, look, this is the Thunder. Let's figure out the best way to build that in a fashion that's consistent with the values of our community, and in a way that we feel like can be best in the short and long term.
What did you see out of Daniel Orton when you chose to sign him?
Mm-hmm.
What did you see out of him that you want to bring him in? I know he's not guaranteed, but his prospects.
Well, Daniel's a talented player. He's had some things, not go his way, the injury. But we like him. He's got a nice edge to him. He's got a high basketball IQ for a young guy. He knows what's going on the floor, and he's done great work since he's been here. So we're excited to see him in camp.
Sam, the last time you had a young guy on your roster that sort of in question what his future was Jeff Green, and obviously that was a huge maneuver for the future.
Mhm.
What did you learn personally going through that whole experience of the trade and just all the ins and outs of that experience?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to do the best thing for the organization, and that's what my job is. And the day that I stop doing what's in the best interest of the organization is the day that they should get somebody else.
Perk said you're close to signing James. Will you meet with Perk and find out how close you are?
Well, we've had an assistant GM opening since Rob left, but I think Perk's going to spend a little more time on the court before we move him into an office.
But he did say something I thought was interesting. He said maybe just natural coming back and seeing his teammates might influence Harden or Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
make him more open-minded. Do you think there's some truth to that, just getting back with your teammates?
Well, I think one thing we can't do is put expectations, on specific people and how they're going to react to things. I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think that we've got a good group of people, a good group of professionals. I think the expectation is going to be everybody's going to come in and do their job as they always have. I'm not really that concerned with that. I've got a lot of confidence in the group. With that said, people react differently to different things. I think sometimes we forget that, these guys are professional basketball players and they're highly skilled at what they do, but they're also people, and they've got to they've got to evaluate situations. And if those conversations happen internally, that might happen. If they don't, I don't know. But I wouldn't want to place judgment or place expectations on how people react to things. I don't think that's necessarily fair.